Welcome back to the Chasing Happiness podcast, an honest podcast about finding happiness, what it really means, and the process of getting there. My name is Crystal, and today I am joined by, and I'm going to attempt to get this right, but I just learned it, so I very well may get it wrong, Sharon Koifman, the author of a book called Surviving Remote Work, which I think is kind of perfect for right now, which is the whole reason we're going to talk about this on the podcast. And aside from being an author, do you want to actually introduce yourself to the Chasing Happiness community and let them know who you are and sort of what you do?
Okay, so yes, you got my name right. The last name is Koifman, just to add a little bit to the help. I ran companies from my computer for the past 20 years. And what I mean companies, I don't mean some affiliate program with some kind of funny marketing thing. I mean tangible with employees and services and products. And for the past 12 years, I've been running the first remote recruitment agency where I find people jobs from all over the world that work remotely for North American technology companies. I also run a media company, an online publication for remote working and remote management. In other words, I'm trying to be the remote guy and to do the best to have people not only get a job remotely, but have the happiest, most productive way of working in order for this to be potentially the best decision they ever made or the best decision that their company has ever made.
Now, because you are the remote guy, I have all kinds of questions because obviously the last year and a half, 2 years, a lot of people became remote people sort of unexpectedly in this weird, crazy COVID world we live in. So did you see a lot of people struggling sort of to adjust to what that was? Or has it been sort of a blessing in disguise for a lot of people?
For some people, it was a blessing. For some people, it was a curse. It was for the people that it was a blessing. They understood that this is their opportunity to be more in control of the work, to work in a more optimal environment, and to be more productive. For the companies they felt it was positive. They saw that there is incredibly a much bigger level of production that is coming out of this remote culture and remote work environment. And there's a lot of research. There's just tons of research, even before COVID, but now with COVID, they're showing that people are significantly more productive. Now, of course, there's the other side of people who feel, or on the management side or the company side, just not ready to make a change. And that obstacle that they have to change into a remote working mentality is actually preventing them from getting more production. And a more legitimate concern that I do find with the remote workers is, first of all, their company is not ready, so it makes life miserable for them. And in general, they've had a much easier social experience in their office environment that they no longer have at home. And that is a very legitimate concern. This is I'm a little controversial among the remote evangelists where we say everything remote is awesome and why would you not? Because research shows that the majority of people are happier and more independent, and it's amazing, it's great, but there is a percentage that legitimately have a concern and it needs to be dealt with.
And I would imagine being the remote guy, you've seen this for years. You sort of, I'm assuming, sort of knew some of this was going to come when the COVID world started to happen because you've been working in the remote area for so long. You already had a pretty good understanding of what those challenges looked like before all of this.
Well, I already created a beautiful culture and a happy working environment 5 years before COVID existed. I mean, when I started the remote originally, it was a cost proposition of great value. My first office was in India, and India is known to be a place where you get cheap labor. And I just couldn't refuse. But the investment in people, I always invest in people, but I didn't understand how important it is because in my first company, which was a web hosting company, the people that were working for me were almost like numbers. They were so distant, they were out of sight, and the results were not so great. And then when I realized that I need to invest in this team of remote individuals, the same way that I would invest in people in an office environment even more, I suddenly discovered that this is not just a cheap labor proposition. This is the future of production.
And that I think is a huge thing, because I think, especially for someone like myself who has noticed how many people are now wanting to be remote because they understand that freedom. But there is also this weird dichotomy of trying to also be seen as an individual rather than just a number in the place that you work, and wanting to actually have a human connection still, which isn't necessarily always easy when you're doing remote work. It's such an interesting place and time that I think we live in. And you being sort of a pioneer of this industry, I think is really important, because you knew before we ended up where we are today with COVID, that those interactions, those human to human interactions with your employees and not treating them like numbers was going to be something that was vitally important to continue the kind of work that you're doing. So for people right now who maybe are struggling with the decision of, do I go back to the office? Do I stay remote? Do I find someone like yourself who can help me be a remote worker? What advice would you have for them?
So one of the biggest challenge with remote work is the managers. It is the employers. It sucks for me to say that while the employee needs to sometimes take a big decision or leave that company or try to change the mentality of the company if they don't get it, but it is up to the management to start investing more in the personal, in being more intimate and investing more in the personal life of their employees, to get on a much more personal level. And that's how you increase the success in the environment. But if you do not have those bosses, potentially you can become one of them by impressing your boss so much that they say, okay, you clearly are the right person to manage my future remote people. Which, keep in mind, there's a lot of old school bosses out there who are not evil or not interested to make the life of the remote employees miserable. They just don't know. This is old school. Means you come into the office, I check, I see that you come on time, you type on the computer, or you do your production, you leave, and we're great. Besides, there's so much research showing that the average person produces about 2 hours and 53 minutes in an 8-hour shift. So it never worked, but it always looked good.
Right.
But so the challenge is that it does come with the manager and the employer to have the right attitude, and not just to come into this because they've been forced to go remote, but try to make the best out of it. For the remote employees, there is a challenge. There's a legitimate challenge. We already been pushed through social media, starting with TV, then the internet, then social media, then video games. Sorry, video games came before. That we're being shoved more to our home, and now remote is just the next step in that particular challenge, which is not an impossible challenge, but it is a new reality. We're sitting at home in front of the screen more and more and more and more. And if we're not going to be proactive in getting out of the house and investing in our social experience, that's when remote becomes a problem. And the good news, specifically with remote work, unlike the social media and all the other things that brought us home, remote work actually gives you more hours in the day, because you don't need to travel. You are more productive. You don't need to stop a project in the middle because you need to drive home or because you need to go to lunch with the team, or you are getting, and you don't get as distracted. So that's why the research shows that you're significantly more productive and you have more hours. You actually should be taking half an hour per day. If not, if you're too busy, half an hour per week, and research and invest in your social experience. Book it like you would book your business meetings. So if you're the happy hour lunch person, or the person that goes for a run or walks in the park, whatever you imagine or whatever you did in your office environment that created that social experience, book it. Nothing stops you from going for lunches with your colleagues. Nothing stops you with going for a run or going to the gym or going. Well, again, do your own research, whatever appeals to you. But now you have extra time. Take that half an hour. Take that hour and research. What I do, I spend at least an hour a week researching the best restaurants that I can go and hang out with my friends or my wife.
I love that.
Yeah. It's not business, but it is business. It keeps me sane, and it keeps an extrovert like me really functioning well in a remote environment.
Well, and I think that's a big deal, because a lot of people think, hey, only introverts are doing well in this working from home remote space. And I think it's really important to know extroverts can do well too, but you have to prioritize, right? And that is one of the things you talk about. You have to treat it like every other aspect of your life. And as much as, some of us don't want to be in this time managed world, you have to make appointments with yourself, with your friends, with your family, with your children. All of those things require us to actually be intentional with the time that we're devoting.
Yep. So like you said, introverts won. They won. This is the dream for many of the introverts out there. In general, when I wrote my book, I did research on introverts and extroverts. I thought it was just a funny concept that hypothetical, but there's really data and there's really a lot of science in it. And introverts technically are more productive. They're actually better they're better in listening, they're better in absorbing information and producing something, as long as you let them work in an optimal working environment. The office environment has been scary, has been intimidating. Loudmouth like me always get the best gigs because we just talked more and made the boss feel like we're going to be more proactive. But it is actually, if you want to look at gems in your office, it's the introverts. And you find those gems so much more when you actually work in a remote environment. I remember my director of HR, which is a director of recruitment, which is my main product, is such an introvert and never contributed in conversations, in meetings. And it irritated me for the first few years. And then I realized this guy is brilliant. He's amazing. It doesn't want to throw an opinion. Like me and my CEO argue every week about every extra point. And it's like, okay, let them argue. I need to work. Right. The extroverts have a new challenge. You got to be proactive. You got to, if you were enjoying certain social experience in the past, you got to replicate this. You got to figure out how to get out of the house. Because it's not just about productivity, it's about longevity. And if you do have quality managers that understand the remote experience, they will book things for the team to get out of the house. During COVID, they send everybody home. Now we're in a much safer environment. Book the lunches, book the happy hours, book the gyms, that whatever services and benefits that the company had before, replicate it and do better.
I love that. I love the replicate it and do better, because I think before all of this, we lived in a world where people idealized certain places. People wanted to work at Google because you could take a day off and go do something fun because they paid you for it, or GoPro, which would give you one afternoon a week to go follow your passion and you would still get paid, kind of thing. But I think now, especially in this sort of remote work age, because we have the freedom that you're talking about, we're not commuting 2 to 3 hours a day to work. We're not necessarily, spending 30 minutes every morning in a useless sort of meeting just to check in with people. Things are much more direct, and we have a little bit of that extra time, but we're not necessarily utilizing it for those things that we kind of idealized and we wanted. We're just shifting because we're at home. We're shifting to something else that's home-based, like laundry or dishes, rather than prioritizing those work meetings or those work lunches and, going out socializing or going to the gym or those sorts of things. So it's one of the reasons why I kind of love how you talk about all of this, because you have this way of sort of balancing. Yes, there are distractions in a remote environment, but there is a way to make it more business-like to fit each individual sort of person's need based on what makes them comfortable in this remote world. And I wonder if part of the reason you chose to write this book is because you've seen that dynamic of all the different people who tried to work remote before COVID and it wasn't necessarily working. So you know the strategies, you know how to do that. Is that what sort of drove you to start to write the book?
Well, what drove me to write the book is that I was very proud about my team, about the way we work, the way we function, and the incredible culture that we have. That everything that you would not imagine in a remote environment, I think I have better company culture and better working environment that most company have. And also the misconceptions that come with an office environment. Like you said, the distraction in remote, the distraction in office is 10 times worse than anything, than your kids, the laundry, the kitchen, everything. Nothing is worse than cubicles. Cubicles are the devil of production.
Right? I totally agree.
So it still blows my mind. I remember talking 3 years ago to accountant friend of mine. She's a senior accountant, senior partner in a firm, and the firm decided that they want to bring everybody to cubicles. So not only they're ruining production of the juniors, now they're ruining the production of the seniors because they want to make everybody interact and everything. And they don't understand that every time that somebody distracts you, it just talk about movie or somebody flirts down the corner, it takes 20 minutes to come back to focus. Right. So there is no better working environment than a remote environment, even if you have kids, even if you have anything. And I'm a stay-home daddy with 46 employees and a pretty sizable company. Right. And they don't distract me ever as close to anything than an office environment do. So to get back to why I wrote this book, I personally felt that COVID came. People are being forced to go home. They think that this is a curse. I need to help them fix this as soon as possible. And hopefully some of them would come out of this feeling that their company just doubled in size because everything is all right. It's not a big deal. There's a lot of things not all right with COVID, but the remote part of it is awesome. It's not only not a curse, it is potentially the best move for your employees and your company that you have ever made. So I was in a rush. I was on vacation in an all-inclusive resort literally 2 days after they shut down everything and said, this is real. I put my baby to sleep, right? She was a good sleeper then, not anymore. I put her to sleep in the resort, and for 2 hours I wrote my first 15 pages in that vacation, and I just needed to upload all this data because people really need it then.
I love that. And I think people really do need it now. I know for me, where I'm located here in Canada, a lot of people are struggling right now with, do I actually go back to an office? And this debate is happening about, am I a better worker? Am I a better parent? Am I a better daughter, mother, friend, sister when I'm at home and versus when I'm busy in the office and constantly, working 9 million different things at a time? And so I think the timeliness of your book is so important as people try to determine, can they do this long term? Is it worth it for them? And not just from working for other people, but also as an entrepreneur. Is it worth it if I started a side business during COVID to turn that into a real career and work as an entrepreneur from home going forward? So I love that, you sort of serendipitously came out with this just sort of at the perfect time, because I think your book has a lot of insights for people and gives people, if they haven't been able to logically look at this because COVID has sort of fogged a lot of brains, it gives people the logical reasoning to say, hey, wait a minute, you're right. I'm not commuting 3 hours a day. I'm not super stressed out because I can show up in my pajamas if I need to.
Which is, by the way, it's against my rules. You shouldn't be showing up with your pajamas. But sorry for interrupting. Yes,
no, that's okay.
You should get dressed and you should have your working station as far away from your bed as possible.
Which is another super important thing, right? Because we've come into this weird COVID world, people sort of makeshifted on the kitchen table an office rather than an actual space. And so you're giving people all of these tips to help them make it functional, work better for them, if maybe they haven't had the ability to do that because their boss simply said, well, you can't come in, figure it out. And there was no support. Your book is kind of like a support system.
Yes, absolutely. And it's really funny also to make it an easy read. I also find that too many business and management books out there are just always too serious, and I try to be a little extra silly in that book, so it will be fun to read while you get to learn all that experience.
I absolutely love that. And I have to say, I love the cover, especially because it spoke to my heart because my brother, so I live in Canada, we get snow. It's always very cold, but my brother is one of those like never wears pants, is always wearing shorts. And so you're wearing shorts and flip-flops and you have a baby crawling across your desk and all of that. So I loved the cover of your book because of that. It just spoke to my soul. I was like, oh, yep, this is totally my brother.
The truth is it happens. Like I make a policy based on what we mentioned. I actually do wear suits to Zoom meetings. I believe that. I don't know why that stopped, but sometimes I cheat and wear shorts. It really happens. This is not the picture on my book. This is, I think you need to be presentable, but sometimes I forget to wear pants.
There's a headline in there. I forget to wear pants. I love it.
Yes.
The one thing that I do want to really quickly chat with you about is a lot of people, I think, have struggled in the last year and a half, especially if they have kids working at home, because when your kids are in front of you and in the same space as you, they're front of mind versus when you're in the office and they're, in daycare or at school or whatever it happens to be. So as a dad, how do you manage the fact that your kids are in the same space as you essentially, but you still need to be focused on work? Can you speak a little bit to that?
Absolutely. So the biggest theme in the book is management distraction. And you brought on a very interesting topic because most CEOs like me usually spend 12 hours in the office and they come back late and everything. And I made a very big decision that I want to be a very proactive daddy. I just really love those two girls, and as wackadoodles they are. And during COVID, I couldn't send them to daycare, and I couldn't have any help or paid help or anything. And it was 2-3 months of that reality. But we needed to make some big decisions. And for me, production is all about the accumulative hours that you can work at the same time without distraction, right? This is if you understand that goal that you're trying to, if people produce in an office 2 hours and 53 minutes. If you can work 6 hours or 5 hours undistracted, you will do much better than most average and be incredibly productive. But how do you achieve that at home with kids? You negotiate with your partner. You say, listen, my wife is a businesswoman also, right? I want to respect her and respect her company. I don't like that concept that you just drop your work because daddy makes a little more money. That's not a fair way to do it. And it's not a good example for the girls. So we negotiate 6 hours me, 6 hours you. I love the kids. I don't want to see them for 6 hours. And then after that, I'll be super daddy. And you take care of your business. If it has to be 4, usually works very well at 5 and 5, and everybody goes for supper together, and you won. So in those 3 months, I negotiated with my wife that for certain hours of the day, I need pure focused work. So after that, I can go and hang out with the kids, and then potentially pick up the phone and talk to suppliers that are not so important or nothing of that sort. Sure. That's how I manage. Now, also, another topic that I do bring in the second version of the book that I wrote, because I felt like it was missing in the first one, is hired help. You got to evaluate the value of your time. You got to evaluate the amount of time that you're getting distracted. And sometimes you might be perfectly good working 2 hours a day, but in general, you should be producing 5 to 6 hours a day if you want to start your own business or whatever, or working for a serious job. And with that, you need to evaluate whether not getting higher help costs you more money or costs you less. And this is not just a discussion. I'm a pretty well-off individual, but I think it's a discussion for any middle-class individual when they're investing in building something financially important for them.
That's such a great piece of advice, and something that I think often we don't necessarily sit down to think about. So I appreciate you sharing that with the Chasing Happiness community, and I appreciate your time. For everyone listening, the book is called Surviving Remote Work: How to Thrive as a Leader and Entrepreneur in the Remote Age. And of course, I will share links to the book on our social media pages, as well as in the show notes for this podcast, so that everyone can follow. But before I let you go, is there any other advice, recommendations, anything that you want to share with people? Because we are living in this really strange remote world now. And for a lot of people, not like yourself, this is a first. People haven't really had to experience this, or haven't chosen to experience this. So is there anything else you'd like to share?
So there's a lot to share, but if I can stick to one advice, is that the mentality that you're approaching this will affect your success, will affect your productivity and longevity for that matter. If you feel, after all the research and after the demonstrations and everything that shows that remote work does produce more, does make your life happier and more flexible, if you choose to feel that this is not working for you and this doesn't make sense for you, you should go to the office as soon as possible, right? Because it's not going to work. If you gotta own it, you gotta cherish it, you gotta see it as the biggest benefit you got ever. If it's not for you, move on, right? Move on, go back to the office, but the moment that they let you do it.
I think that's a great piece of advice, because often we've just sort of done, I think, especially here in North America, done what we're told. We've never taken the time to actually evaluate for ourselves what works best. Mm-hmm. So I love that that's part of what you talk about, because I think we all, especially now, are starting to take the ability and the time to process who we really want to be, how we want to work, what that really looks like, who we want to work for. You know, people are spending so much time now searching for companies that do value them as individuals, not just as numbers, as you were talking about. So I thank you so much for your time today, and I super appreciate the book. I cannot think of something that has happened sort of more timely in my world, because this just, Heather introduced me to you, and it just sort of all kind of coincided, and it was kind of like this big poof. And I think for a lot of people, your book is sort of that big poof of like, okay, well, now that the world is slowly getting back to normal, what does that look like for me? And am I going to continue to choose this sort of blessing that has happened out of COVID, of remote work and more freedom and more time and productivity all rolled into one? Because most people believe that it's not productive. Most people have chosen to believe that this remote world is more of a distraction, and you, with not just the data, but with the actual know-how of how to make it not that. I think it's just so vitally important right now. And I am so grateful to have had you on the podcast. So thank you so much for your time today.
It's been a real pleasure, Crystal. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And for everyone listening, again, I will post all of the links in the show notes. I appreciate you all coming back and listening week after week, and I will chat with you all next week. Bye for now.